So welcome to Kit137A. We're going to kick it off with Madeline doing wine number one.
What
happened? There we go.
No, that's correct. And actually, for those of you who are in the background going, are all of the wines going to be testable? A lot of these are very testable, but just to remind us all, it's really the breadth and the depth we're going for. And, you know, Evan, to his great credit, and those of us who are lucky enough to taste with him, aim for wines that are killer examples of type, regardless of how obscure or pervasive they may be. So that said, I put up some questions here just because sometimes the mind wants something to hang on to. And these occurred to me today in thinking about this wine and tasting it. You know, the whole issue of if, especially white wines, if the grape varieties make wine that are highly aromatic, moderately, or perhaps a little neutral is something to consider, especially in deductive tasting. You know, there's a big difference between, let's say, Riesling and Pinot Gris, just saying, and those two grapes may or may not have any damn thing to do with the wine we're tasting right now. The evidence of oak is an interesting thing to keep in the back of your head. I'm not telling you to look for it. It's just an issue that sometimes you may or may not get evidence of it, and you may get something reflected that maybe oak or maybe something else in a similar aromatic vein. And then finally, whether you want to call it mouthfeel or texture, I think is important, not just to deductive reasoning, but frankly, to the enjoyment of the wine, especially when we're representing it to consumers. So that said, visually, this wine is a beautiful, bright yellow, verging on light gold, actually. I see no green glints. And again, when we consider color, you know, the three broad categories are straw, yellow, and gold. And you can, you know, qualify them as you see fit. The wine moves with some viscosity in the glass, and I don't, you know, I'm not going to get too precious about looking at the legs, but it appears they appear to be running moderately slow and maybe getting some indication of alcohol and or extract. But the color does not look like it was born yesterday, so it's not straw with green glints. I'm going to go ahead and nose it and take it on the palate, probably in one breath. We'll see how expressive the nose is on its own. And immediately, just the prettiest, perfectly ripe, I would say golden and yellow apple. So very much an expression of ideal tree fruit and Bosc pears as well. There's a little bit of tropical element in there too, pineapple, I think. You know, it's not a brass band, but it's in there. And a little bit of stone fruit as well, sort of gentle peach. I do smell citrus tone, just a pure lemon character, and also a little bit of fresh florality. It's secondary or tertiary note, but I would say, you know, fresh jasmine, fresh, you know, apple blossom, that type of thing. And maybe a little bit of chamomile and lemongrass. So it's got herbal, floral notes down the road. It's got stone, citrus, and tree fruit, and a little bit of tropical fruit as well. And I don't think I'm imagining a little bit of, you know, that hackneyed phrase, rocky minerality, but let's just take it on the palate and see if it expresses itself there as well. It smells just beautiful and pure and clean and defined. I don't have to fight for it. Almost had to swallow the whole thing. It's important to have your spit cup, right? But we're not driving anywhere, even in Detroit tonight. I'm staying upstairs. So the attack is a little bit of a surprise. It's bright lemon, both in terms of flavor and the effect of the acidity, which is absolutely cleansing. And it's ripe lemon, maybe a little bit of Meyer lemon, but definitely palate cleansing citrus. I'm going to take another sip immediately because, and this is a little party trick or a sommelier secret. Sometimes on your first approach to a wine, even if it's been, let's say, half an hour or an hour since you've tasted it, the structural element of tannin or acid can be a little bit of a shock and can mask some of the flavors. So My palate's getting used to the mouth-watering acidity. Mid palate, as I hold it on my palate, another good party trick, plum line of flavor that mirrors those ripe tree fruits and stone fruits. But whoa, the acidity is definitely driving the finish, which is incredibly long. I don't pick up any evidence of oak on this, at least not overt. There's a little bit of a maybe lactic character that I don't think is mallow. And we'll see what my colleagues think momentarily, but tense acidity, long, moderate alcohol, bright, ripe fruit. And Li Meng is nudging me to nudge you to address the polls. Please remember these are anonymous. And I think it is, well, it's not only useful to you, it's essential to us to see what you think. So if there is another other, please, click it and then put what you think in the chat room. But we've got Chardonnay and Pinot Gris / Grigio, which are, in my book, neutral grape varieties, meaning that they take their aromatics largely from where they're grown and how they're handled. And then we have a highly aromatic variety, Viognier, or a Viognier blend. Other highly aromatic varieties, I mentioned one would be Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc. The regions we're considering from the old world, Italy and France. So, Italy could be the Pinot Grigio, France could absolutely be Viognier, Chardonnay, or Pinot Gris. And then we've got a couple of cheerful New World options, New Zealand and California for all of the above. How are they doing in terms of filling out the poll, Li Meng?
So I think that we have most people in the top two choices of Chardonnay and Pinot Grigio, but they're pretty split. So maybe help them out a little bit.
I'm happy to. I would say for me, Pinot Gris / Grigio, generally, not always, has softer acidity than Chardonnay, especially if Chardonnay is grown in a cool growing region. So I think the acid structure will be different on those two grape varieties. Aromatically, both of them show tree fruit, especially pear and apple. I think the depth of flavor in Pinot Grigio can be, and I'm really generalizing, unless it's a top producer in old vines, probably simpler and perhaps a little bit less of a depth of flavor than on top Chardonnay, apples to apples. Yeah. And whoever's considering Viognier, there is a floral aromatic in there, but I would say it's more subtle than overt. And there is minerality on this wine. Whether it's enough to shove us into the old world or not, we're about to see.
So we have a question here from Jerry, and I love this question. Jerry, just make sure that you're putting your chat out to everyone. And so so that everyone can participate as well and see your comment. The question here is, the acidity, Maddie, is it medium plus, or is this more of a high acidity?
I would say it's medium plus, but it is, palate cleansing. If you called it high, I wouldn't say you were wrong. I mean, to a degree, sometimes these things are personal, and they can be personal to your capacity to tolerate or perceive an element. So we've got over 50% Chardonnay, but over 25% Pinot Grigio. Healthy people think it's Viognier, and I want to know if anyone's checking the chat, because I can't pat my head and rub my stomach at the same time, who's voting for other and what it is. Italy, France, is any New World showing up as an option down here? New Zealand.
There's
and
New
California.
World. It's about split, a third. Italy, France, and California.
And I think that's wonderful, and I'll tell you why. Loire Valley Chenin, excellent, which is a moderately aromatic grape variety. Yay! I think the expression of minerality is proof here with everyone split between Old World and New World, because I would be struggling with that as well. So let's reveal this beautiful wine. And we are, and our globe has decided to take a little nap, so it's taking its time waking up. So I will tell you, it is from
slower at the end of the year, doesn't it?
Yes, it is from.
We're coming from Mars,
very cool growing region, and we've got a combination of very bright sunlight, quite high altitude and a strong maritime influence. Yay. And where are we? We are in Manchester. Oh, you know what? Manchester Ridge Vineyard, correct? Which is lying in, I just went brain dead on the appellation.
Coastal Mendocino.
Coastal Mendocino,
Ridge.
yes. Mendocino Ridge, thank you. I got my ridges mixed up. And we're talking about an appellation that is utterly unique. It's the only non-contiguous appellation in the United States. So you have pockets of 250,000 acres, of which only, wait for it, 75 are planted. So we're talking, you know, a small growing region. And dig this, the AVA specifies that you have to be over 1,200 feet above in elevation to get to put this appellation on your label, which I think is just thrilling. This particular vineyard is literally 4 miles from the Pacific. And if you go on Google Earth, my best friend, and look up the vineyard, you will see that it is really on a ridge, and it is surrounded by trees. So it's just above the tree line, and you can, like, you know, hail to the Pacific very easily. The crow's going to have an easy time flying to it. This is a producer, brick and mortar, and they intentionally have lowercase brick and lowercase mortar because they make a point of describing how they are not the point, that the vineyards that they use are the point, which are all high altitude, cool climate, small lot, single vineyard, Chardonnay, Pinot, and Syrah, but they also make vintage Méthode Classique, Méthode Champenoise sparkling wines, and Pétillant Sonoma Coast Rosé. It is owned and operated by a lovely couple who have a Greek name, Iakonis. I get to say that because I'm Greek, Matt and Alexis. And they collaborate on this project. I think what's really wonderful about this wine is it is a reflection of their, you know, heartfelt press. They've got sun, maritime influence, elevation, very long hang time, right? So you get, put your nose in the glass, that bright, bright fruit, but on the palate, that bracing acidity, and the minerality is not a hallucination. So I would like to ask Tim or Evan, with that much inorganic earth, what would nudge you into the old world on this? Because I bet money some of the folks who are tasting with us are thinking this. No mallow on this wine, by the way. At least that's what they claim, and I can't imagine they're not telling the truth.
Tim, go for it first. I defer.
Yeah, well, you know, the what I call the decision matrix on this wine is, first of all, it's got oak. Okay, so that should immediately rule out Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio. Viognier possibly, and then from there, the question is the alone at the edge of the universe moment is there enough earth and mineral to take you to the old world? And for me, there's not quite enough. Right, because the fruit still dominates the wine. I think, Maddie, to your point, I don't think there's any ML, or if there is, there's very little malolactic, but there's definitely lees contact here. So we've got 2 of the 3 of the trinity of Chardonnay winemaking here. And Chardonnay would have been my first go-to, something like cool Sonoma Coast or Mendocino Ridge, something cold coastal. But there's not, you know, if in my head, if I try to take this to Chablis or the Côte de Beaune with Chardonnay, I just can't get there. Right, it doesn't have the intensity.
But one can wrestle with it. One can wrestle.
Yeah,
with
you
it,
can.
you know?
You can. Yeah,
I mean, blind is blind. We know what it is.
Yeah,
yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
I think the person who called Chablis, you know, zeroed in on the Chardonnay, you know, which is great.
I think so too.
There's a question here from Lisa. Thank you, Lisa, for the question. Can you discuss what makes the acidity so high?
It's cool,
you know,
climate.
I think maybe part of that's
yeah,
I think part of that's just the first wine of the 6, to believe it or not. Yeah, because
I mean, I think that definitely is always your first wine of the day. By the way, if you ever want to, you know, make it harder for a wine, make it the first wine of your tasting if you're doing a flight. That's an old trick that that people know, but it also takes a strong wine to handle being the first wine in the tasting. I think, as Madeline pointed out, I mean, one of the things that, and we love Matt and Alexis, they're fabulous people, and Alexis has worked with us off and on over the years too, tasting and stuff. is that they specifically seek out cool climate sites. And when you have cool climate, if you look at sort of the, the inverted pyramid theory, the more sun you get, the warmer the climate, the riper the fruit's going to be. And if there is minerality to be had, it's going to diminish the minerality. If the site's colder, the minerality, if it's there, is going to stand out more. And the fruit, if you hit that wonderful balance of being ripe, but not being overripe, there's nothing marmaladey or candied or custardy about the nature of the fruit here. It's just perfectly precisioned ripe fruit, then that actually helps enhance the minerality and back and forth. So I think this is an extraordinary example of, for lack of better words, a new world wine made with very old world sensibility, both in terms of the production, but also in terms of the harvesting, the thinking, etc. I'm sure there's a bit of conscientiousness of riding that edge to pick the fruit when it's just ripe enough, but not overripe. So not only does it change the personality of how the fruit expresses itself, but it also preserves that razor rapier-like acidity that, for Chardonnay in California, this wine possesses.
I know that Limang wants to move on, so I want to say 3 things in bullet points. There's a saltiness to this wine too. So again, there's that mineral component, which is, offset by the ripeness of New World fruit. The use of oak, to Tim's point, is what we would call blended oak. There's nothing overt about the oak on this wine. So chances are at least a portion, most of it is older barrel. I don't get a blast of baking spice on this. And frankly, I will invite you to retaste this wine after the reds, just to see how it's showing, because that might be useful as well. But I tasted this an hour ago and the acidity was dramatic then too. So thank you, wine number 1.
Yep.
Right.
Maddie, I'm only doing it for you. You're wine number 6. We got to save time for you. So
Yes.
We do need to catch up a little bit. But as Evan said, shout out to Alexis. She's worked with Master of the World, helped us taste and all that. But it's also a real pleasure to bring to the spotlight a small winery like this out of Healdsburg, California. So Evan, on to you.
All right, onwards,
wine
wine 2. Again, just a couple of questions for you to hang your hat on as you go through here. Think about dry and fruity, and I don't say that to be sort of trite, but oftentimes there's a confusion there of dry versus fruity. Fruity being, of course, the presence of fruit, and dryness being actual the level of residual sugar within the wine. So that's as much as a reminder as it is an observation and a question. And then what are we getting here? Is it really about the floral? Is it about the fruit? What kind of fruit, etc.? Think about how the organics, the thing that grows out of the ground, presents itself. And then obviously texture, something that is both a clue to a wine's style, a clue to a wine's treatment, and a clue to just you're checking yourself. So right off the bat, this wine looks differently than the first wine in the sense that it doesn't possess both the depth of color nor the advent of age of color. Again, white wines get darker as they get a little bit older. The first wine we know has a few years on it. The second wine may not, or it may not simply be as heavily pigmented a variety or not express itself because of the way it was aged. Nose and mouth at the same time. Right off the bat, you've got a very different expression, a very highly aromatic expression. So if Madeline's wine was a taste of an unaromatic or relatively neutral variety, then this probably shoots the other extreme, being highly aromatic and very fruit driven. And the fruit here are sort of multifaceted. I would say, to me, what leads here, fruit-wise, tends to be the tropical, a little bit of unripe and ripe pineapple, a little bit of guava, perhaps a kiss of passion fruit in there, a little bit of mango or slightly unripe or fresh mango. Then you do get other fruit in there. And there is, again, that sort of same tree fruit that Madeline talked about before, perhaps here lending itself more to tree fruit than stone fruit, because they do grow on trees, right? More peaches and nectarines and things like that. So there is arguably apple or Asian pear sort of character to that fruit. And then sort of a sweet citrus, call it tangerine, call it satsuma, whatever, it's there too. But what also knocks me out here is the florality of this wine. This wine is screaming flowers here, whether it's honeysuckle, whether it's the exotics of jasmine or freesia or tuberoses or anything like that just sort of pops you there, or even if you've ever gotten off a plane in Hawaii and they put one of those leis around your neck made out of plumeria, that same sort of intoxicating aroma, I think, is very present in a wine like this. And then there's some light other things. There's a little bit of chamomile, maybe a little bit of verbena in there. What I'm definitely not getting, though, is any strong sense of oak or oak aging, of any of that treatment that goes with oak, be it batonnage or things like that. I am getting other elements that suggest treatment to me. There's a bit of phenol or bitterness or tannin in white wine character here, which would suggest to me probably some skin contact in the production of this wine. Yeah, and let's go ahead and taste it.
I love this wine.
Wine is fresh, it's vibrant, it tastes like it smells. It is a wallop of florality without being ostentatious or over the top, and has lovely fruit. Freshness, again, nothing that suggests oak to us. There's an austerity. The acidity is appropriate, particularly when we find out what it is later on. It's perhaps even on the higher side of appropriate for what it could be. And just refreshing and bright. And while it's delicious to sip, my brain immediately goes to food. Where am I going to go with this? What sort of types of food would I think about with? And we can talk about that later if I don't get beaten on the clock. And delightful acidity level, I would probably put it somewhere between medium plus, leaning more on the medium side than the high side. The alcohol level is probably moderate, but again, quite ripe. Again, I'd probably give it a medium plus-ish, medium plus probably level of there. No oak, no sweetness, so it is fruity for sure, dry for sure, and no oak, no tannin. Although there are phenols there, like I said before. If you're getting a little bit of bitterness in the finish here, that has to do with more with skin contact than any additional added tannin that could come through oak. So what do we got here? We got choices. We got two lesser aromatic varieties in Garganega, which is sort of pushing the more aromatic side, Pinot Blanc, which is pushing the more neutral side, Torrontés, which is a very strongly aromatic grape. And then if you're thinking others, other type them away. And then associated regions, France, certainly for the Pinot Blanc, Spain could be for the Torrontés, Argentina for the Torrontés as well. Australia does a little bit of all of those, and Pinot Blanc and Garganega as well. You could put Italy in there too, if you strongly believe that to be the case of choice, and rock and roll. So that's what
While people are answering, I just want to remind everyone, this is anonymous, so definitely take your answer, because we would love to see what you're thinking. Just a quick question to Maddie while people are answering. That last vineyard on Manchester Ridge, was that above or below the fog line, did you say?
It's above the fog line.
Okay, great. Perfect.
indeed
Awesome.
That altitude, the altitude minimum that Madeline referenced before is because it's above the fog line. Has to be above the fog line.
Well, Evan, I think this one, maybe because of all the aromatics, 93% are on Torrontés. So, and I that's
perhaps a
probably
good
what's
call.
driving that's probably
Perhaps
what's
a good
driving that Argentina call at 69% too. So I'm going to end the poll here, and share the results of the poll so that everyone else can see what I'm seeing, which is that 88% now think that it's a Torrontés, 6% at Garganega, and Pinot Blanc, and because probably the high Torrontés, we're going to Argentina.
But it is important. I will, but it is important to note that, for those people that did pick Spain, there is a grape called Torrontés, which I'm going to give you credit for, even though it's technically not related to Torrontés. O versus U, you get credit from me just for knowing that. But it is, and again, I think the aromatics are probably what makes this a more softball of a wine compared to, say, the first one, which required a little bit more brain juice. Sometimes we like to keep things a little bit fun and easy. And this is per se not a quote unquote testable variety, but it's certainly one that you should know, and that is certainly considered within the pantheon of increasingly classic grapes. So as we leave California, we're going to, of course, I'm not going to give it away. We sort of figured it out. We are going to get on a plane. We're going to go north, and we're going to go way south. People don't think about it, because even though from where I sit here in California, the time zone difference is not that much, depending on time of year, daylight savings times are not 4 to 5 hours. It's a 14-hour flight to get there from here, because you got to go east and then you got to go way south. So here we are in Argentina, in the north of Argentina, specifically in the appellation of Salta, in the far north at a particularly ab-fab property called the Estancia Los Cardones, which sits literally right in the heart of the Calchaquías Valley and is run by or farmed by or managed by, if you will, an amazing team of two guys. We'll meet them a little bit later. One American, one Argentinian, but they do a lovely, lovely job. And I think what's interesting about this, the Calchaquías area is it's not just everyone thinks about sort of everything being salt and everything being Calchaquías. Things are being pushed. There are more wines coming out of Calchi in the further north. There's Humahuaca in the further north, and there's even people making wine further north than Salta these days in places like Jujuy. So this comes from a property called Anco. Anco means high water in the local Indian dialect, and it is in the area of Salta, as I said before, in the Calchaquías Valley, and it is sort of not familiar with it, is a grape that's actually a old grape. It's considered what they call a Criolla, Criolla grape, which is one of the original grapes that came over to South America. Remember, there are no native grapes in South America. All grapes were brought over. This grape came over via the Canary Islands, or I should say 2 grapes came over. One was called
I think Evan's having some audio problems, huh? Okay. Evan, we're gonna just let your internet come back on. And while that's happening, we actually have 3 questions from the audience about this. So Evan, there seems to be a problem with your audio. I'm gonna just launch into some questions that actually are
I'm
right
back.
at the point of
He's
where
back.
he's
I'm back. I don't
hear
know.
you.
I got popped out and then I got beat up again. So anyway, let me just finish that and then we'll hit the let me hit the questions afterwards, because I do think it's important to understand a little bit about this grape. Also understand that this grape, which is a cross between Muscat and País, there are 3 versions of it. There's the most aromatic version of it, which is called the Riojana from La Rioja, or Salteña from Salta clone, which tends to be the brightest, most floral and most aromatic, and with the highest acid level of the 3. Then you have the San Juanino or Juanino clone and the Mendocino or Mendoza clone, both of which are much more understated than that. But it's a very old grape, literally dates back to the 1500s and 1600s. And yeah, I mean, just a lovely expression of what it is. Almost always produced with skin contact, ergo almost always phenolic. Now,
right,
please ask the question.
I think it'll be great to stop for questions right now because they are related to this genealogy that you're talking about. How do you distinguish Torrentes from Muscat? Getting a lot of grape aromas, which I usually associate with Muscat. Great question from Venkat.
Well, first of all, half of the parentage is Muscat, so it shouldn't be a surprise to you that's there. The other side of it is that Muscats tend to be literally muskier, a little bit more feral, a little bit more animal by nature. And this particular Muscat tends to be extraordinarily floral, with the Muscat character being an understated part, the florals driving it more. And if you think of Muscat from Alexandria, it tends to be a little bit on that musky side. If you think about Muscat Canelli, which is the white Muscat, the other one, a Petit Grain, it also tends to have sort of a more perfume, deeper, heavier thing. This is a much lighter element there. And again, the florality would just sort of steer me away from being Muscat. Just too floral without enough musk for me.
Yeah. And then Kristen's got a comment here, Evan. There's this fake white grape juice perfume to her with a chemical-like finish. Do you get that at all, or can you isolate what she's thinking about?
I think she's just thinking that, you know, I'm not getting that. Muscat wines are often described as being grapey, and here we're talking about just sort of white grapey sort of character. So I understand that, but it's really the perfume lift and the florality that drives this, probably coupled a little bit with the tropical fruit nature, again, which is very signature of this variety here. But it doesn't come off. I mean, if that comes off to you as artificial, I can understand where somebody's coming from. It comes off as just being purely authentic to me. This shows you where we are. Again, lifted, you're not too far away from the spine of the Andes there, and a very rocky or rock-flecked soil. There's a lot of mica in the soil. There's a lot of quartz in the soil, which reflects back up, all that. Just a lovely there. And there are the 2 guys. Jeff Mosbach, actually the American guy on the right-hand side, and Alejandro, they call him Colo. Colo, it means redhead in South America, so he's a redhead. Jeff's really more of a sort of winemaker, marketing guy. Colo's more of a dirt, viticulture, winemaking guy too, and they have a wonderful partnership that goes back to the days when they worked at Catena together down in Mendoza.
Oh, wow.
Terrific guys, and literally sleuthing great parcels of land all over not only Mendoza, but here in Salta as well.
Beautiful wine, beautiful wine. Okay. And
this is specifically
ask,
Riojano. Yes. Salteña and Riojano come there. If it comes from Salta, it's going to be that same clone. And you'll always know if it's Juanino, if it comes from San Juan, Mendocino, if it comes from Mendoza.
Okay. Nice job on timing, Evan. All right, wine number 3. And Evan gave us
everybody.
here four red wines in this kit. I love it.
That's the hall. It's cold. We need more red wine.
Yep. All right, everybody. Now to the first red wine, wine number 3. And let's take a look at the color. The color, is, I think in the saturation range, it's about medium. I can actually see through the outer edges. I'd call it a true ruby. Medium plus ruby, not quite deep. It lightens up to a lighter kind of pink, magenta. And what else about it? The tears, legs, Marangoni, whatever you want to call it, are definitely medium. So I'm not expecting a really rich wine. Okay. And then on the nose, talk about the fruit first. And, it's always good with red wines to categorize the color of the fruit first and to get more specific. So this is a mix of red and darker or black fruit, predominantly red. And I would say things like strawberry and red cherry, sour red cherry, maybe some raspberry and maybe some plum. And they are fresh and tart and ripe, both. And then the darker fruit is lifted, kind of tart black fruits like blackberry and maybe just right black cherry. There's a touch of what I would call mandarin orange, like orange peel in it. And in terms of above the glass and the flowers, there's some really pretty rose petal that you can pick up. And now for the non-fruit and the kind of the green and herbal and other category. So first off, there's kind of black tea to me, kind of like Assam or Darjeeling. And then there's herbal characters. There's kind of like bay laurel and maybe some anise, some star anise. And then now we're into the vegetable. So there's brown mushrooms. And what else? There's a little salad greens in there too. All right. And from there in the earth and mineral range, there's some of both. I would say there's turned soil. And this is also, I would, map the brown mushroom over to it. And then on the palate, there's a little bit of mineral too. And it's there. And then I'm going to leave it to you as you smell and taste the wine to decide what's driving the bus. We got fruit, or we got everything else driving the bus. And that's an important key once you get to the conclusion. And there's definitely some oak aging here. It's mixed, but there is definitely some vanilla, smoked toast, spice, various spices. And along with that, there's a little bit of oxidative qualities that you do get from oak aging, like bitter almond skin and maybe some marzipan. And there's the fruit qualities, to me, probably whole cluster or partial, because on the palate, there's some green stem tannin. And when you taste, the stem tannin is right in the middle of the wine, right? So it's after all the fruit, and all of a sudden there's this green kind of hard element to the wine. In terms of the structure, wine's dry. The acid, salivary glands are working. And so I'd say the wine is medium plus in acid. It's not high. For me personally, I don't know how my two distinguished colleagues feel about it, but high acid to me, I get salivary glands going crazy, and then I feel it on the enamel of my teeth. That to me that combo is high acid every time, okay? This is just making the salivary glands work. The tannins, though, are very supple and they're fine, all right? So this is not a tannic grape variety. In terms of the length, this is medium plus, headed towards long, but not quite. And I would also give the complexity, we talked about a lot of things. So somewhere, bordering on high. I think this is a really complex wine. And then now that the longer it's in the mouth, more persistent it is. So I'm going to go back and say that's a long finish. This is a really good quality wine. Okay, so your major decisions, ladies and gentlemen out there, it says, first of all, given the color and the question asked, what family or group of grapes could this be? Is this lighter pigmented, deeper pigmented? And there, the quality of the fruit, predominantly red. How much earth or mineral is going to take you someplace? There's use of oak, and then how much tannin, okay? And with that, place your votes. I almost said bets. Maybe that comes later.
We're going to set that up
maybe,
next. We're going to have like betting on wines. We can do that.
I was going to say, since we've got, the gaming, the betting on gaming now, we could do that, I'm sure, easily. Anyway.
New revenue stream.
Yeah. All right, so there are your possibilities. So Gamay and Pinot Noir and Grenache blend. And Libe, do you want me to talk about those now or later?
Actually, there is a question about how do you taste for stem inclusion in the flavors that you look for as people are filling this out. We still have, I'm just going to encourage people out there, 58% participation. Come on, peeps. You can do it. Just guess.
Be brave. All right, so when you taste for stem inclusion, look, take a sip of the wine, hold it in your mouth for like 3 to 5 seconds and spit it out. And then for me, stem tannin is in the middle. It's between the fruit and the finish. That's the middle of the wine, which is, by the way, that's if a wine is complex, that's where there's a lot of stuff versus not a lot of stuff. But for me, there's a green, hard, twiggy quality to it, which is stems. And if that's the case, then that means at least part of the fermentation that went on had to do with whole clusters, which were still attached to stems. Okay, hope that answers the question.
Great. All right. You can go, I think people are, 50% are in the Pinot camp, and then it's kind of split between Gamay and Grenache. So you want to
let's
give a
talk
hint?
about those. Yeah, real quick. Okay, so this is a classic example of Gamay. Odds are it's going to be Beaujolais Village, which is carbonic maceration and stem inclusion. So here we got the stem inclusion, but we don't have all the tutti frutti Hawaiian punch, banana, etc. descriptors that you would use with Beaujolais Village. Is it Beaujolais Cru? Possibly. If Beaujolais Cru usually doesn't have the carbonic. Some do, most don't. But what they do have is a really profound minerality to them. Granite, and in some cases limestone, depending on the village. Then we get to Grenache blend, and Grenache compared to the other two grapes is like opening the door to a frat party, for God's sake, because all of a sudden we've gone to alcohol that's high and ripeness and just a big wine that's tannic. Yeah. It's anything that's Southern Rhone, or if you think about Grenache from the Barossa in Australia, it would be frat party with mint and eucalyptus. So, it's just such a different animal from the other two grapes. Okay.
All right. I think we're going to end the poll. I do see also this old world skew, but it's pretty split between 57 and 40-some%. I'll share the results.
Okay. Yeah.
As you can see here.
Here we go. Okay, so we've got Gamay at almost 30%, Pinot Noir at 50%, and then Grenache blend. Okay. And then France for a lot. So everybody, I have to ask you, and this is tough because this is the first red wine. I think if we go back and reassess this wine after tasting the other 3 red wines, you're going to go, oh yeah, okay, yeah. A lot of this makes sense, okay? So that makes a challenge. In other words, you got to stay with us. You got to keep the seatbelt fastened. All right, so let's see. We're going to get in the plane and we're going to go a really long way. This is one of those flights where you take a Simply Sleep and put the mask on.
You got to have an aisle seat, man.
Yeah, I'm gonna start sending out
and for me,
Ambien
an
with
exit
the,
row aisle. It's got to
Ambien with
have
our
layers.
kids, right? Go to sleep.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Whoa.
And you get there and you don't even know what time of day it is.
And the first thing you
I don't
do
know
when you
about
get off the
you, but
plane,
coming back from the Antipodes is always much harder. Okay, we are in the
This
South
is
Island
such a
of New
great
Zealand.
wine. Wow.
Yes, and we are in Central Otago, which has become one of the premier areas in the world for Pinot Noir. And oddly enough, so 40, 50 years ago, there was nothing planted here. Not only that, the climate here, you know what, you see pictures of this place and you know what, it looks like northern New Mexico because it's elevated, it's dry. This particular place, and this is Burn Cottage, Midnight Race Pinot Noir in Central Otago. And here, this is in the PZ, what's called the Pisa Range. And, you know, there's literally 12 inches of rainfall a year, which is frankly just like up around Taos and Santa Fe, right? And it's very dry, it's arid. It's a great place to grow Pinot Noir. The owners, Marquis and Diane Sauvage, and that's actually their name. The Sauvage family owns the Kohler Ruprecht estate in the Pfalz in southern Germany, and that's one of the top estates in the Pfalz. And then here in the US, they own several import and distribution companies. But in 2002, they bought this section of land that was previously unplanted to grapes, had been used forever and a day to graze sheep. And it just turns out in terms of aspect, it was like an amphitheater. So it's protected from the wind, receives maximum sunshine. And the name is the Midnight Race. It's a very curious thing. I had to read about it because races in this part of New Zealand were literally irrigation channels that were dug up to the foothills, because I mentioned it's just a very arid place. And what else about this? Vineyards planted in 2003. This is a blend from 2 different vineyards. Traditional native ferment, small containers, open top, and then mixed oak, predominantly used, and all French in 12 months. And I think it's a lovely wine. It just shows you forever and a day, you know, we said, oh, New Zealand's going to be there. Well, New Zealand is there. It's absolutely there. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the average age of the vines, which now is anywhere from 25 to 40 years. So, yeah, lots of good wines. And I think this is a beautiful example of New Zealand Pinot.
I have to say, I was
oh,
delighted.
sorry, you first.
No, I was just going to say just a quick commercial aside. We were happy to get this. You know, we tasted this at one of our tastings in August here in California that Madeline and Tim attended, and we all loved the wine. And again, we always have to have unanimity or agreement of the team to do it. And I put the order in, and it was a little bit back and forth. And then as soon as the order got placed and processed, the wine got the #1 New Zealand Pinot Noir of the year in a couple of publications, and it was all gone. So hopefully you can still find a bottle or two straggling at retail or maybe in your favorite restaurant. But clearly we were not the only people who were excited about it.
Or you could buy 137A for your friends and family. It's
Yes.
selling on our site. Just saying.
I was going to just jump in and say 2 things. Now I know why when I requested this from Evan for a custom kit, he went, no way, baby. So I didn't know about the, you know, top Pinot, New Zealand, etc. I like to think of simple things deductively and overstate the obvious. And I loved what Tim said. You know, aromatically, there's so much going on. When you get it on the palate, the fruit drives the bus, you know, and if you are wondering where to put it, you know, this isn't a good or bad thing. It just is. And I think the character of the fruit is so fresh and perfectly ripe. And that's where it sings New World to me. But boy, you wouldn't have a hard time giving this to anybody. Now, my favorite kind of wine, you can give it to a snob or to Aunt Minnie, and they will like it. Yay.
And I have to say the best comment of the year, Karis, as a Lord of the Rings fan myself, I love your comment. We're talking Rohan instead of the Shire. You don't get to go watch the movies. But there's a question here, Ruth, is asking small production, Evan?
Very small production. I mean, I don't know how many couple thousand-ish cases they must make of this wine, but the reality is you're not going to find any wine in large production in Central Otago. I mean, the producers there are all pretty small, and the amount of vineyard land planted, the reputation is bigger than the region of the area. Think about it like Burgundy. You know, we think grandiose, but in reality, there's just not a lot of it.
And I just want to point out that Evan has this very difficult job in buying of playing the high-low game. You know, he wants to put something like a Burn Cottage in. He's really trying to make sure that everybody here gets great value and, you know, the hard negotiation. So kudos for making this wine get in there. This is not licensed to buy more expensive wines, you know, but I just love the fact that the high-low game really worked out in our favor here, Evan. All right. beautiful landscape. Tim?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. Yeah. And there's the crew. Gotta love it. Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, I'm looking at the rock formations in the back, and it looks like if you're driving between Santa Fe and Los Alamos, that's kind of what it looks like. Sands Vineyards.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to think that.
No, I was just going to say, if you notice on the truck it says Cromwell, once you start exploring Central Otago, you'll realize that there are different subzones within the area too, of which all have different and distinctive personalities. We're not going to get that granular here, but just if you're interested in Pinot Noir, and if you follow Burgundy in place and subzones in California and subzones and neighborhoods, this is another part of the world that very much reflects that.
Yeah.
This is really interesting. And Tim, would you say that these are the first generation vines then in Central Otago?
No.
But
No, there were vines that went in the early 90s. So there are vines that predate these by at least a decade.
if you look at Ripon and some of the earlier producers, that one.
That's awesome. Okay, Tim, on to you. Wine number
All
four.
right, on to wine number 4, and now for something completely different. Okay. The only thing that this wine, in terms of appearance, has in common with the previous wine is that, once again, if you look at it, especially if you look at glass 5 by comparison, this wine is translucent. You can see through it, right? And the color, though, is quite different. So this is definitely some ruby, some red color, but with garnet. So there's some evolution here. Maybe that has to do with extended time in wood, or maybe that just has to do with overall age, and we will discover that presently. Notice also the color of the edge of the rim. It is, again, more of a garnet color, so more of a reddish brown. Once again, it's a sign of evolution or maybe some age. Time spent in oak. And in terms of the tierce legs, whatever you want to call them, again, it's about, it's a little higher. So somewhere between medium plus and maybe high. So I'm expecting a richer wine here, and we'll find that out as soon as we smell and taste it. All right, on the nose. All right. This is a completely different animal from the last wine. Okay. The Brits would say this is a very savory wine. And what they mean by that, savory is everything but fruit. Okay. So the last wine here was a lot of gorgeous fruit, right? And floral qualities too. This has fruit, predominantly red again. It's sour red cherry and pomegranate and maybe rhubarb, which is a vegetable. Yeah, I know. But things that are red and sour, but this time they're dry. They're ripe and they're dried. And some tart qualities too. There's a little dark fruit quality next. And I would describe that as kind of plum and maybe some blackberry. But once again, it's dried. It's ripe and dried, and maybe a little tart element. So everything is linking back to the evolution and the color. And that's the way it should work. When you take a look at the color of a wine, especially red wine, it's going to set you up for expectations on especially the fruit quality of the wine and maybe even the structure. We'll find that out. Other things. I mentioned that the wine is really savory. It is. There's both potpourri and rose on the nose, and they're both dry. Everything about this wine is headed towards dry, and that speaks to the age. What else about it? There's dried savory greens, almost like salad greens, capers, savory things once again like that. What else? Fennel and mushroom and star anise. And there's a little leather quality to it as well. And sun-dried tomato and tomato leaf. Okay, but notice everything I'm saying is dry. Kind of a dry turned soil. There's also a chalky quality to it. There's mushrooms bordering on truffles. Again, it's a very savory, earthy wine. And then finally, I just in the dried green category, we got to mention there's savory herbs like oregano and thyme. Okay, that's quite a lot, right? And finally, we'll get to the oak usage, which is mixed. It's a blend. It's predominantly older oak. I think it's French because it's not really spicy, but here is smoke and toast, which are more on the palate and more on the texture of the wine than, really being upfront and on the nose. Okay, everybody, please retaste it for the structure.
Oh.
Okay. It's different in 2 or 3 major ways. First of all, after you spit the wine out, say, oh, and inhale, and the alcohol's higher. Yep, you can feel warmth right in here. Okay, so the alcohol to me is high. It's 14.5 or higher. Okay, which is very curious because then the acid's higher than the Pinot Noir. Okay, as we would say in New Mexico. How does that happen? Okay, and the final thing is this time take another sip of the wine. This is for science. And this hold it in your mouth for about 3 seconds and then swallow it. And as you're doing, ask yourself how much tannin and where is it in your mouth? And is it in more than one place? And the answer is yes, it is. Okay. So there's quite a bit of tannin here. It's medium plus. It's not quite high, but it's medium plus and beyond. And there's tannin in the back of the mouth and in the front of the mouth. And for me, not sure about my two compadres, but tannin in the front of the mouth is grape tannin. And if I get that kind of tannin qualities, especially in the front of the mouth, I go to one country almost immediately. Okay. With that, we have the ballots up here. Everybody cast your votes. Your votes are Sangiovese, Blend, Nebbiolo, and then we've got the frat party back for repeat offense or performance or something. Okay, so everybody wants you to take a look. And, you know, if you're on the fence about old world, new world, you can go back and taste the Pinot Noir again. Okay. And compared to this wine, it might be like Hello Kitty now. It could be really different.
Great. Well, I can see folks are thinking. We've got 82% participated here. And the leading candidate is Sangiovese with Nebbiolo not far behind. You know, we often try to put these two together in choices so that Tim has this teaching moment to help people out.
Yeah, it's actually one of the toughest pair in blind tasting to tell apart, you know.
Do you go into that in your book, Tim?
I do. It's funny you should mention
maybe
that.
people should buy that book and then they could learn
Yes,
about these.
There's a chapter in the book that's called
Yeah.
There's a chapter in the book that's called Confronting the Evil Dwarves. And that's easily confused white and red grapes. And lo and behold, one of those two comparisons is Sangiovese and Nebbiolo.
I want to know if there are more frat party grapes that play with Grenache. Is that in the book too? No.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I ever used the term frat party, but Zinfandel definitely comes in that category.
There we go.
You know?
Yeah,
It's just, you know, grapes/wines that tend to just want to get out of control, you know.
All right. So Tim, it is there. That confusion is definitely there. So Sangiovese, 57%.
Okay, great. Yeah, so everybody, you know, if you put, and you know, one of the things I talk about in my book is that if you don't own a Coravin, you should buy one. Okay, and this is a perfect example of why you should own one, because that will allow you to buy a really good Barolo or Barbaresco and something like a good Chianti Classico, either Reserva or Gran Selezione, and put them next to each other and taste them for about a week until your brain goes, I got this and I own it. Okay, the main differences between Nebbiolo and Sangiovese to me is the Sangiovese is 100%. Like, and this particular wine is a Chianti Classico, that's 100%. The Nebbiolo, by and large, is going to have higher alcohol, higher acid, and more tannin. Okay, by and large, it's going to be more of all those things together, and it's going to be really floral. Okay, so I'm keying off structure, but the fact that Nebbiolo can be so floral and it can also show more oxidation in the color right from the get-go. Okay. Now, that being said, you know, you could be tasting a Brunello next to it, and then it's different. Again, the structure should always key you into Nebbiolo. Okay, here we go. So we're going to go to a place where you have a glass of Chianti Classico in your hand, and you're in Florence, and you're not happy. You may be the one with issues.
No kidding.
It's one of my favorite places on the planet.
Oh my God.
The food, the art, the history, it's so beautiful. And the only challenge is that everybody else on the planet knows.
And they're there too, yes.
Oh my God, you got to go either in April or in like October. Yeah.
I was just thinking if we track the mileage of this flight, this might be the longest trip.
I was going to say, we're going to
Tuscany,
so far.
Inland,
and you're doing it
so
for the comfort of your home.
There
I
you
love
go.
it.
Yeah. So everybody, we are in Chianti Classico, and I want to make this point. It's not Chianti, it's Chianti Classico. Chianti is a big place. it's bigger in area than Napa Valley is. Chianti Classico is much smaller. It's the original zone that was demarcated in 1716. This is the Rocca della Macia estate in Chianti Classico. It is owned by Italo Zingarelli, who is a TV and movie producer, and it was his life's dream to acquire the estate. It's about a 200-acre estate, and he did that in 1973. His kids and grandkids run it to this day. And now the Zingarelli operations, they own 6 different estates, both in Chianti Classico, 3 of them, and then 3 of them in Maremma, which is the coastal region, where a lot of designer, super Tuscan wines like Sassicaia are made. But this is, to me, quintessential Chianti Classico, 100% Sangiovese, traditional fermentation, and used French oak for 12 months. And I think it's a perfect example. It's 2018, by the way, everybody, which explains the elevated alcohol, because for most of Europe, 2018 was a warm vintage, like 2006 or 2003. So that explains the ripeness. But at the same time, Sangiovese, if I can use this expression, Evan, is to me the baseball of red grapes. Because whatever you do to it, you can't change it. Can't change the game, right? And to me, it's got such an unmistakable footprint of the fruit qualities and the structure. So you can see even the alcohol elevated here, it's acid and tannin, not a problem. It's still it's balanced.
Tim, I want a tag team on what you just said, because I'm going to tell everyone, if you want to memorize one nose, this is the one.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't think you'll disagree with me on this, Tim. I just think however you want to define it, I would work this wine over 2 or 3 days, and don't even think, just let it wash over you and see then if you can perceive and define different elements, because I think it's just a beautiful expression of Sangiovese.
It's also a treat because, not to say that there are not a lot of others, but so many really good Chiantis are made with quote unquote a modicum of other grapes in them, whether it's Colorino or even white grapes, exactly, Cabernet and stuff like that. And to have the purity of it in such a well done, respectful estate. And this, by the way, is a single plot or single vineyard wine as opposed to a blend of their different estates. Really shows well, and it just continues to open up in the glass and really express itself. Sergio.
Yeah, and Venkat, just for you, a deeper look into that chicken picture right there. I love that. I love that picture.
The chicken.
Yeah, remember that the Gallo Nero, that's the symbol of the Chianti Classico Consorzio. So not a surprise.
And goes very well with Chianti, I might add too. So
I love the yo-yo of vintages. I feel like as a student of wine, it's really helpful to go 2020 New Zealand and then go 2018 Chianti Classico. It really helps you to, as Madeline was talking about, memorizing that profile to learn ageability too.
Yep.
Super
I
cool.
loved what you said about savory elements on this too, Tim. I made a note for myself. There's so much that's everything but fruit. I mean, obviously there's fruit there too, but I think, in terms of the stamp of a grape variety beautifully represented. There you go.
To me, Sangiovese-based wines are, Sangiovese is one of my, top 3 favorite red grapes. Pinot Noir being the first, but it's like the expensive girlfriend, boyfriend you can never afford, because the best examples are prohibitively expensive. In fact, I checked recently the price of 2018 Romani Conti just for Grens. You guys know how much it is? A bottle runs $20,000. Yeah. There's a shop in New York City that's selling a 3-pack for $127,000.
Time to drain the cellar and put them on the third-party market. So.
Yeah, I just think that Sangiovese, it offers so much value and so much of the delicious factor, and to me, it's one of the great wines with food, one of the most versatile red wines with food.
Great.
All right, on to
wine
wine 5.
Evan.
Yeah, let's talk about wine 5. And my goal here is to make sure we give Madeline enough time to talk about wine 6, because I know, yes, I know she really likes wine 6. So again, a couple of questions for you to think about there, and particularly focusing not so much on the first question, the second question a little bit, and the third one to a certain extent. So we look at this wine. I'm looking at it against the other 2 reds thus far, perhaps a little bit more depth of color and a nice range of color being between having a nice ruby core and a little bit of a slight pinkish type edge, which might suggest a little bit of youth with the variety or just a natural state of the variety, etc. But all the fun is in the nose and in the mouth. So let's focus ourselves there. This wine has a lovely combination of, again, red and black fruits, and not necessarily the most, for lack of a better word, sweet of fruits. So to me, this is more about currants. This is more about plums. And then this has some of the more savory elements. Cherry tomatoes. Remember, tomato is a fruit, not a vegetable, right? So a little bit of a tomato element that's both on the sweet side of it, but also a little bit on that sun-dried side of it that Tim talked about earlier. And there's definitely some herbal elements to this wine. There's some earthier herbal things. You've got a little bit of the mushroom thing going on. You've got peppers. And when I say here peppers, I'm not talking about like jalapenos and pasillas, but really more like riper side of bell peppers, because you know bell peppers go from green to orange and then orange to red, right? This has a little bit more of that orange and red side of peppers there. And then if you dry them up and grind them up, you can make paprika out of them. And I get a little bit of that in the nose as well too. There's definitely some spices, which suggest to me some oak, a little bit of baking spice and some roundness. No real distinctive minerality. There's a bit of stoniness, but again, more of that sort of turned dirt and dusty earth, and maybe a little bit of that foresty floor, mushroomy thing going on. And in the palate, structurally, the wine is broad, quite round, tannin for sure, but round tannin, well-managed tannin. So they're ample, perhaps on that medium plus side, but not gritty, not hard, not astringent. It shows deftness in the production process here. It speaks with a lot going on, so it could very well be a blended wine as opposed to a mono variety wine. Interestingly, if you think about the nature of the expression of fruits and all that, coming off of the Pinot, which is complex but in a singular way, coming off of the Sangiovese, which is complex in a singular way, this has some different things going on, which may suggest a non-monocepage type grape. The acidity level in it is appropriate. I'd probably put it at medium plus, maybe pushing towards medium only in the sense of being balanced and not necessarily shrill. And the length on the wine is still there. It's quite expansive. Finish is long, moderate plus to long, and really well made. I mean, I think what is perhaps most obvious to me about this is it's a well-made, well-guided, well-thought-out, well-intended wine. And when we find out what it is later, I think that'll double down on that. Getting back to the bedding that we talked about earlier, and just delicious. So some good stuff going on there. Very different in expression than the first two red wines were. Again, we try and mix things up here and blend things together, kind of like a good DJ, you know, kind of pick up here, blend there, go like that.
That's what you are, DJ. I love
There
it.
you go, DJ of wines. DJ Vino. Call me
DJ
up on
Vino.
DJ Vino. All right, so what are our choices here? We got a few choices that we can pop up in the polls here. We've got a Syrah kind of blend. Think about what the nature of Syrah is and how it comes off there. Notice I did lead you on the blend rule in all three. A Cabernet Sauvignon, that Bordelais family of grapes. And again, you know, all those, by the way, anytime we put Syrah blend, Cabernet blend, Tempranillo blend, that could mean, by the way, that it's a 100% pure monocepage, but those grapes are often blended with cousin grapes there. Syrah would be Rhone grapes, Cabernet, it would be Bordeaux grapes, Tempranillo, it would be Rioja-ish grapes and things like that, or maybe Cabernet-ish grapes if you were in Ribera del Duero. And then, of course, you've got your other, and then you've got your mix and match geographies along the way, some of which cover multiple categories there, and some which are more singular by nature, but some good stuff there. Tasty wine. Be curious to see where people end up voting. Vote early. Don't vote often. Just vote one time, but vote early.
Evan, while we are letting people, because only 50% of folks have answered this, I'm going to ask the question that Scott, I missed earlier. Tim is answering it. The question about the Chianti Classico, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just answer it live, maybe?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Scott, that's a great question. So his question is he usually said this is, you know, Chianti Classico's to him. I want to make sure I get his, typically had a little less fresh ripeness and more dustiness. Yeah, I would agree, Scott. You know, the only thing I think this once again points to the vintage in this particular wine of just being warmer and riper and just more fruit, and the fruit being really ripe, almost stewed. And usually your typical Chianti Classico wouldn't have this much fruit, right? It would be earthier and more savory, as they say.
And more angular oftentimes too, and just
Yeah.
the structure. So, and the other thing to think about as you're voting here is we talked a little bit about the sort of greener, the pepper, and there's some herbal elements I neglected to mention, but are coming up now as I've tasted the wine on the palate. And think about that, whether it's an herbal nature, a pyrozinic nature, or whatever, which can, by the way, happen in all of those varieties. But if you cool them down, the things pop out differently. Syrah tends to be a little bit more peppery. Cabernets and the related ones tend to be a little bit more in that sort of pyrozinic peppery thing too. But black pepper or cracked pepper on the Syrah, and then Tempranillo tends to share a little bit more in common, although it doesn't get necessarily as pyrozinic as Cabernet would. So there we go. There you have it.
And then, so there is a 50% on Old World and a 50% on New World.
Mm-hmm.
How do we?
Well, I mean, first of all, the New World, Old World thing is not once what it used to be. Between vintages getting riper in the Old World and wines becoming more California-like, if you will, and people adopting more classic sleuthing for terroirs that are cooler or that show Old World characters, it's harder and harder to get. My comment on this, I think that I was going to make to close this one down, I think we'll reflect that a little bit later on. So if I can hang on to that, I think it'll make more sense when we get there.
Great.
Yeah, can I also just make a quick recommendation? If you're on the fence, go back and taste the Chianti Classico.
That's helpful. Yeah.
Referentials are always
That's
very
earth, right?
Yes.
all right.
All right.
So as we continue on our quest to get our 1K status in the space of one tasting, we're going to get out of this part of the world and get out of our area of Italia where we were. Apparently, we're having a hard time getting out of there. Well, who wouldn't want to leave that part of the world? It's so beautiful, such good food and everything. But we are going to work our way back across Europe, and we are going to work our way across hemispheres as well too. And we're going to move. So goodbye, Italy.
Oh, it just does not want to stream.
It does not want to stream. There's too many people in cyberspace, hopefully doing shopping right now, buying presents for their friends. And then, all these people are buying Tim's book right now, and it's crashing the internet. There you go.
I think we'll just go straight to that.
We're going to go straight to Chile, which is where we are. So we're no longer in Italy. We're not in France per se, but if you think about the French connection between Chile and between France, it's an obvious one. The first European non-Criolla, non-Spanish oriented grapes to hit South America came through Chile, and the money that was made in mining back in the early 1800s was then spent as they went over to France, because who wouldn't go to France to then discover things there? And with their money, they said, we need to make wines. Back then, that was Bordeaux, and Bordeaux grapes made it to Chile. This comes from a house called Maquis. Maquis is located in Colchagua. Colchagua sits in the heart of the area of the Cachapoal. You have a Cachapoal and Colchagua appellation in the greater Cachapoal Valley. And the Maquis property, for those of you who were with us last time, you might have remembered that we had a wine called Calcou. We had an amazing Sauvignon Blanc from Calcou, and this is the same owners, just a different brand and a different focus there. But Maquis is sort of the lead dog in this part of the world. It's made by Ricardo Rivadavia is the GM here, is also a winemaker, so he has a strong imprint there. Wine that's consulted on by two French Bordelais consultants in Eric Boissonneau, whose name might be familiar to you, and Xavier Chaunet, who you probably don't know, but is a real more terroir guy, and with Rodrigo Romero, who's the day-to-day winemaker here. It's a very interesting spot within Colchagua. This sits in the subzone of Santa Cruz, technically just outside of Apalta, and it's literally a confluence of the Tinguerica River, which is really the main source of water in this area, but where it comes together with the Chimbarongo Creek, and where these literally two come together. I want you to think about how the estuary of the Gironde comes together, and that you have this sort of like island, which became, in the middle of it. And this literally looks exactly the same. It's alluvial soils there, and it reminds me of something like in the southern Medoc or in the Grave area there, and literally has an alluvial soil thing. So when I was saying before, this reminds me of Bordeaux in Chile, more so than almost any wine I've had, because a lot of the hip Cabernets these days are coming out of the Andes, and they're much more mountain fruit. This is more of the floor fruit, but still verging there, but with all of that alluvial influence. Look at the soils there are stones, and this is the winery there, and they do just an amazing job there. The wine itself is 90% Cabernet. There you have Rodrigo on the right-hand side and Ricardo on the left-hand side. 90% Cab, 6% Cab Franc, 3% Carmenere, which is back in the day the grape of choice, along with Malbec in Bordeaux long before Phylloxera, and then a little bit of Petit Verdot. So it's very much of a sort of Bordelais blend there. And just, I think, if you ended up in France and you ended up sort of in southern Bordeaux, I get it. I mean, the wine does have very Gravian, southern Bordeaux type tendencies to it, and that sort of same smooth, approachable tannic structure. And again, that more sort of savory, curranty fruit. I wouldn't put it graphite-y, which would probably take me away from the Medoc, but it definitely has a Euro edge to it. And again, sort of that nice balance of red and black fruits to it.
Just I have a question for you, Evan. Why not Carmenere on this?
Carmenere would be, much more pyrrhizinic by itself. If you were to do a pure play Carmenere, that sort of peppery element of it, again, being sort of more in the red and yellow pepper, maybe even green bell pepper if it wasn't ripe enough, element would be driving rather than in the back seat. To me, what I'm getting here is more of the currants and the savory fruit elements here, with the pepperiness being accenting, not so much there. And I think this is also testament to just well managed fruit, because if I were to say that all Cabernet is fruit driven in Chile, we've all had our stocky underripe Cabernets out of there, but these folks do an amazingly good job.
Evan, one question from Jerry. You described this wine as having both red and black fruits. Is it common for Cabernet to demonstrate red and black?
Yeah, and I would say if you're dealing with appropriate climates, really good Cabernet to me is going to show you the riper side of those red fruits, or again, that sort of red currant, red plum element, but also it's going to be more black fruit driven. I mean, that's certainly the nature of the family, but in this particular case, Franc, which is 6%, is going to usually give you more of a red fruit thing. If you think about Bourgogne, if you think about Chinon, if you think about Right Bank Bordeaux, those are always going to have a good contingent of red fruit elements in it there. And then, of course, being stronger on the black fruit, both to the Cabernet, but also the Verdot and the Carmenere that's in there. And that leaves the rest of this time for Maddie.
Yay! Awesome. A race to number 6.
Maddie,
I don't believe it. I'm not ready. I keep going, Evan.
No, Maddie. I know you want to talk about this wine, so I'm giving you ample airspace.
Merci beaucoup. I've really been looking forward to this. So that said, I won't, no spoiler alert. I won't tell you why, but I will tell you that the adventure starts from the very beginning. I mean, do yourself a favor and don't slam through the visual on this wine. Turn it slowly against a white surface. And I've never seen more stain cling to the glass than in this wine. And it is, as opaque gets, and the rim is, purple tinged, but it's really the stain that is very interesting in this wine. And hold the thought. There's a reason for this, not just thick skins and extract. So aromatically, it is extremely generous. One of the first things that hits me is ripe to overripe fruit, and we're talking red, blue, and black. And also some of the fruit is confected and some of the fruit is dried, but none of this is an expression of negativity. It's simply a quality of the fruit. And I think, to me, in how the wine is expressing myself in the glass at this moment, red fruit leads, So we're talking, very ripe, red currant, red plum, and then followed by slightly jammy blueberry, and then followed by a little black fig, and maybe even a raisinated character. There is an oxidative element to this wine that is not a negativity, it just is. And also I get a wave of cool, which is to me alcohol at this particular expression. So I wouldn't be surprised before I take this on my palate, if the alcohol wouldn't be defined as high when I do. I'm going to go ahead and taste it right away. I go silent sometimes because, again, just a personal sommelier secret. I find that holding it on my palate, mid-palate, tells a lot of stories because you get this plumb line of flavor. And then you can pay attention to the finish and the structure and the quality of the fruit. But what I smelled is being reflected on the palate as well. There's dried, confected, perfectly ripe and slightly overripe, red, blue, and black fruit. There's also a cornucopia of wonderful vegetal and herbal characteristic, notably dried herbs, take your pick. I think there's a little bitterness to some of them. There's a garigi, chicory character. Then there's anise, licorice, fennel, maybe a little bit of pepper, but not nearly as much pyrazine as on the previous wine. What's really surprising to me about the structure is, and I'm going to taste it one more time quickly, is the quality of the acidity and the tannin. Because it was a surprise to me. If I were truly blind tasting this, at this point, I would be so intrigued by this wine, I wouldn't really care what it was. I would just be paying attention to how it was expressing itself because it's so unique. It makes me happy to see Tim going, yeah. So this is, on wines like this, it's really critical that you're not sloppy about the difference between acidity and tannin and the quality of both. So the acidity is surprising to me. It's positively refreshing. The tannin is gently drying, but especially in the company of all that fruit, I don't know as I would call it soft, but it definitely doesn't shut the flavor of the wine down. I would say that it is, officially on the website, it says gritty and astringent, and I would take slight issue with that. I think that the tannin is sufficient and it keeps the wine structured, but it's not what I would call hard tannins, just gently drying tannins. There is a very strong expression of earth on this wine, both inorganic and I would say actually more organic than not. Tim has talked about turned earth. Here it is. There's dust, right? There's definitely underneath it all a little bit of that beautiful inorganic minerality that, as sommeliers, we have to stop using that term. The reason I say that is because whenever I use it, consumers look at me like with this blank stare. They don't know what I'm talking about. But the granitic quality that is expressed in this wine, there might be a little bit of meatiness too. And on the palate, I get that same oxidative nuttiness. For me, it comes across as walnuts because it's got a little bit of that bitterness that walnuts have, and also maybe a touch of VA. But I have to be honest with you, I'm a village elder, and I was tasting wines that had a lot of VA before it was defined to me, so I tend to forgive it. And also probably the same thing for Brettanomyces, though I don't pick up Brett on this wine. I haven't mentioned oak. Again, if I were tasting this blind, I would say, boy, if there's any oak on it, it's old oak, and it's large oak. There's nothing, spice driven about this wine. There's a little bit of pepper. And I think I will leave it at that. What questions did I ask? I almost forgot. Yes. Do you think the grapes are grown in a warm, moderate, or cool growing region? Because frankly, with the alcohol level on this wine that I think is verging on high, that leads you to warm. Then you go, but what about the acidity? And then we've talked about the expression of organic and inorganic earth that to me in this wine is a little bit of a brass band. And then the acidity and the tannin. I just think this is a great teaching example of how, whether it leads you to a deduction or not, it's important to get to know yourself as a taster and your ability to perceive and tolerate tannin and acidity and alcohol, actually all structural elements. So that said, I had tiptoed through the tulips, Li Meng, and we are ready for the poll. Let's do 100% on this guy, because
Finish strong.
yeah, let's finish strong. And I don't think this is an easy wine to blind taste. So I would be playful about it. Interestingly, we've reversed the grape varieties in the regions. We've got Italy, France, California, and Argentina, but let's flip down to the grape varieties for a minute. Alicante Boucher, or a blend. That is a grape variety that you don't see everywhere. And Malbec, rules in Argentina, but rears its head a bit in France as well. And Nebbiolo is Nebbiolo, Piemonte and everyone else get out of the way. But I think it'll be entertaining to see what grape you pick and where you put it in the world. I will tell you that color-wise, Nebbiolo is a very different cat than Malbec and Alicante Boucher. Both Alicante Boucher and Malbec can show, deep color saturation, whereas Nebbiolo, and Tim talked about this, with relationship to Sangiovese. If it's not exactly see-through, it definitely, lightens up as you go to the rim and will show orange and yellow tones even when it's young.
So your last poll of the year from Master the World. Come on, guys.
100%, go.
We got to keep going. I think that's great. There's a lot of difference. Evan or Maddie, there's a question here from Jerry. I'd love for you to answer that. I only see Alicante Boucher on exams. What do you say to that?
What do you mean you only see it on, you mean in terms of asking people about it? Or
just Alicante Boucher. Is it really that obscure? I feel like
it's not
a
that
lot of
obscure.
places grow
It's grown with some enthusiasm in Portugal, Spain, Tuscany, and especially the Languedoc. I have to tell you again, go back to the mid palate. There's a sweetness of fruit on this mid palate that balances out that little bit of oxidative note. Alicante Boucher is used to make purple concentrate. Well, it's a Teinturier grape, right? Meaning it has red flesh. And there aren't very many vinifera grapes that are like that. I just like saying Teinturier.
That's a good word.
Okay,
so we have 40% in the old world, 60% in the new world, and more of them in Argentina. And as we look at the grape variety, 47 on Alicante Boucher and 53 on Malbec.
I just love this, that you're going 50-50 between those two grape varieties, and which means 50-50 old world, well, new world, right? And the one thing I will say, and we're going to reveal it now, so go for it. Let's see if we still are in our aisle seat in business class. I hope so, because we're gonna need it, right? That I didn't talk much about a floral element on this wine. There is, a floral element. It's more dried flowers that sort of, goes along with the strong dried herbal element. But, to me, one of the tells of, quote unquote, a terrible term to use, classic Argentine Malbec is both fresh and dried flowers, which I think this wine is not compelling in this wine, though it's got a touch of it. We are indeed in southern France. We are in the middle of the curve of the Mediterranean. We are in Saint Chinian, which is inland from the Mediterranean, in a growing region that is benefiting from cool winds coming up from the north and also Mediterranean winds coming from the south. We are Alicante Boucher, which is a totally fascinating grape. And one of the reasons you will be glad you spent $100 buying the Oxford Companion's big tome on wine grapes, which I still don't think is on Kindle. It is one of the few, as I mentioned, Vitis vinifera red flesh grapes. and it absolutely lends color big time to blends, how it's often used. Look at this label. It is too cool for words.
Love it.
And it is, they don't get to
Goodness.
say Saint Chinian on here. Isn't that killer? And they call this sauvage. You know, that's how they describe this wine. Arôme sauvage, savage or wild, I would say, aromas. And there is indeed a wild boar with, is that a rabbit clinging to its hindquarters? I just
I would
saw
say
that.
so.
So if you buy
Um,
this wine
or a
in
hare.
God.
if you buy a case of this wine in 750, they have a cartoon in there. I should post it.
Oh, you should
Um,
post it.
I should
This,
totally
by the
post it.
way,
The
this
story of
doesn't-
the rabbit and the
No,
boar.
please, because I just saw that. And I will say the reason this doesn't say Saint Chinian on the label is because they're outside of the parameters of being able to use the appellation. Though the producer's estate is there. And a couple more things about Alicante Bouschet, because it's so damn fascinating. A lot of it was planted post-phylloxera because of its deep yellow color and its high yields. I mean, it can go up to 200 hectoliters per hectare, whoa-y. But if you control the yields, it can make really complex, neat wine, which you can see here. And, you know, its dominant home is in the Hérault in the Languedoc. But as I also mentioned, Spain, Portugal, and Italy, especially in the Alentejo, right? And I experienced this, but wonderful examples. And in Tuscany on the coast. AKA Maremma, that's also been mentioned. What
I
else
love
to tell you?
this.
Oh, look at this
It's a great
family
photo.
picture. Isn't it killer? So Arnaud and Nicolas are the two brothers that are making this wine. There's their dad and their mom, evidently, and then kiddies, Gabin, Elisa, Elliot, and Marceau. And look at Marceau, you know, too much charm for words. They make a significant number of cuvées in their quite warm but moderated climate because of the breezes, and they've got pretty complex soils, limestone and sandstone. Notably, they do not use any oak on this wine. This is fermented in concrete,
Wow.
which they proudly tell you is submerged. You know, the concrete tanks are submerged for at least 2 meters, so they're a pain in the neck to work, and then it's aged in concrete and stainless. I just find this wine utterly charming because of the intensity of it. And I don't know about all y'all, but I'm always looking for something that to give to people that say, I want, you know, something other than Cabernet, but it kind of has to be Cabernet, right? Where you have something that's opaque and that's got intensity and enough tannin to make you feel it's serious. I'm thrilled that we showed this wine.
I'm actually delighted too, because this is literally, over all of my years of trying wine, the only French Alicante Bouschet that I've ever had that I liked. You know, and I remember when the person who's the
Wow.
supplier said, oh, because we were looking, and we've used Alicante Bouschet before, for those of you who've been in these things, usually as part of an Alentejo blend, either
Yeah.
a driving or a strong support
Mhm.
second grape. But the grape's from France originally. And the ones I've tasted over the years have just been mean, hard, unpleasant, green, whatever. And so when the supplier said, oh, well, you should check out this Alicante Bouschet, it's French, I rolled my eyes and they said, I'll try it for you. I promise nothing. And we got the wine and we tasted it in August. And sure enough, it was a stellar example. And like I said, literally the best example of a French one I've ever had in my life.
So again,